Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and the types of graphical and performance enhancements we could be seeing on the Switch 2 cross-gen version. For some time, I've been thinking that we would be getting a cross-gen version, even before we saw anything during the recent Nintendo Direct, and when Nintendo finally showed off Prime 4 during the Direct, my feelings, my beliefs on there being a cross-gen version were even more so validated because the game is coming out in 2025, but also because of the way the game was presented. After Brandon and I did our initial graphics analysis and comparison of Prime 4, we noticed a lot of things, a lot of ways that they could improve this game on Switch 2. And so while Nintendo's yet to have shown off anything about Switch 2 yet, based off what we saw from the Prime 4 Beyond trailer, and also based off what we've heard of the hardware Switch 2, I am going to be going over all the improvements I expect to see in this enhanced version of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So many people saw Metroid Prime 4 Beyond's first trailer, and some of which thought that there is no way this could be Switch 1 footage, that somehow it had to be Switch 2 footage. And just telling you straight up, no. It's not Switch 2 footage, it's not even close. The Switch 2 is going to be a vastly more powerful console. From everything we've heard, we're talking about substantial leaps here. There have been a variety of different insiders that have spoken out on the types of multi-platform games we're going to be seeing on the console. There are going to be elements of the Switch 2 that we've heard could be comparable to the Xbox Series S, a console that is far more powerful than the Switch. And I'm not here trying to say that a portable system is going to be more powerful than the current gen platforms, but there are going to be aspects of the Switch 2 that will be more advanced and significantly more powerful than anything close to the Switch. And from what we saw the Prime 4 trailer, it's pretty much in line with what was done with Metroid Prime Remastered, a game that we already have on Nintendo Switch. And yes, it looks great. It's considered to be one of the best looking games on Switch, and I do think with Prime 4 Beyond they've improved in some ways. But it's clear that this game is building off of that, and this is definitely possible on Switch. We see a few frame rate stutters, for example, in the trailer. This trailer has the Nintendo Switch logo. This trailer has low resolution textures. This trailer is missing a lot of shadow effects. And there's even been some debate on the resolution, but Digital Foundry is under the impression that this game is running at 900p, and based off the analysis that Brandon and I put together, we also think it's running at 900p. Which is the same resolution as Metroid Prime Remastered on Nintendo Switch. From what we've heard of Switch 2, this console is going to be outputting far higher resolutions. So if you think the Switch 1 version of Prime 4 is impressive, just wait until we see this potential Switch 2 version. So in what ways will this Switch 2 version look better? Well, going over what we understand of Switch 2 in terms of its abilities, from the Gamescom leaks, by the way, a lot of the sources to the information I'm talking about here will be linked in the description below, but from the Gamescom leaks, we understand that the Switch 2 will have the ability to run games at 4K, at a high resolution, with next to no load times. There's a tech demo showcasing the ability of Switch 2 where it's running Breath of the Wild in 4K, 60 frames per second, a game that was running at 30 and a choppy 30 at times on Switch 1, while also having virtually zero load times. And then there's the Matrix tech demo that was showcasing pretty impressive ray tracing abilities. Now, if you don't understand what ray tracing is, it's the simulation of real-world lighting effects. And these effects can be very demanding for a system. But from what we've also heard of Switch 2, it's going to be utilizing some form of NVIDIA's DLSS technology, Deep Learning Super Sampling. Essentially, they use AI to improve visuals and performance in a variety of ways: resolution, sometimes frame rate, and even ray tracing through ray reconstruction. And so this technology that NVIDIA and Nintendo are putting together is going to allow the Switch 2 to punch above its weight. So now that we have all that in mind, let's talk about the improvements we'll see in Prime 4. The most obvious and immediate one is that the game will be running at a higher resolution, not 900p. Now, we don't know what resolution the game will be running at, potentially 4K. The Switch 2, from what we've heard, will be dramatically more powerful, so maybe 4K could be feasible, but at the very least, I'm going to think that through DLSS, we're going to see 1440p. So the game is going to be a lot sharper. But that will go beyond just resolution. I also expect texture quality to be vastly improved. Taking a look at some of these stills from the trailer, you can see that the textures are kinda muddy, they're kinda blurry, there isn't too much that is very clear there. Because this is a Switch game, but on Switch 2, I imagine they'll be able to output much greater texture quality. But going beyond that, I'm expecting vastly improved anti-aliasing. So with aliasing, that's when you see kind of like those pixely diagonal lines, and they're all over. On Switch 2, I'd expect things like this to be not noticeable at all. They'll look clean and straight. So with this all implemented, the game is definitely going to be looking a lot crisper compared to the Switch 1 version. But I think they can go even further beyond. Pun intended. Something else I noticed from the trailer is that there was a lack of shadows being casted in certain areas. Take a look at this pipe moving down, for example. It's not casting any sort of obvious shadows. I'm expecting more realistic shadows to be casted throughout the world. Think about when we see fire, for example. Yeah, we can see a little bit of an orange glow, but the fire should also be causing different objects to cast shadows. And with the fire moving around, these shadows would be moving dynamically. And it would go beyond fire, but just light overall. Consider Samus's arm cannon. As she shoots, that's going to create a visual effect, and with these extra casted shadows, there's going to be a certain level of improved depth that I think will definitely make for a huge difference. And I don't want to take away from the improved lighting effects we're seeing from the arm cannon already. An issue that we saw in Prime Remastered is that the beam cannon shots weren't lighting the environment as much, but from our analysis, I noticed the arm cannon shots are casting certain lights, and even right before impact, we are seeing the beam shots light up the enemies. But this effect is still fairly subtle. I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps it's a bit more obvious, or there are at least other elements going on that show evidence of these beam shots. For example, looking at the ground, it does appear to be wet, like a puddle. Perhaps we could be seeing more realistic reflections. Which brings me to the ray tracing part of the equation. As we discussed earlier, the Switch 2 may have some pretty good options when it comes to ray tracing. And with the footage I'm showing here, I think it does a great job of demonstrating how something would look without ray tracing and how something would look with it. And from what we see in the Prime 4 trailer, there are some areas where we see reflections, and with ray tracing, they would look a lot better. And maybe because of ray tracing, that's why we wouldn't see Prime 4 running at 4K, because ray tracing can be pretty demanding. But 1440p with everything I've mentioned, including ray tracing, I think would lead to a game looking significantly better. But I still think there would be other elements to this game that would be improved. For example, reduced pop-in. Check this one scene here. As Samus is moving up, we can see details on the ground appearing. This is pop-in, and it's not realistic. That's not how things operate in real life. So with a better performing system, we can expect reduced pop-in. Things like this will become even less obvious. And since we're discussing pop-in, let's also talk about draw distance. We may not have seen too many environments in Prime 4 yet, but I would assume that the draw distance would be better. Even more of the world will be drawn in from a distance, and it will look better on Switch 2. And this might also tie into the background we see in the forest area. There's been some talk of how the background almost looks like a 2D image, like a realistic 2D image off into the distance, and this might be a smart way to give us something that looks really cool, but also not take too much away from the horsepower of the console. Perhaps on Switch 2, backgrounds like this might be drawn in a way that look a bit more believable. A cool effect that has been noticed in Prime 4 is that when an enemy is defeated, after a small moment, they disintegrate. And I think this is a much cooler effect than just fading away. It helps with the immersion of the game. But something that would further help the immersion is if they don't despawn so quickly. I would still expect them to disintegrate after a certain amount of time, but perhaps on Switch 2 we can take out several enemies before we start to see that disintegration, where we can actually take a moment to look at these enemies during the aftermath of a battle. And then once we move on and we shoot the next beam door or progress to the next area, there will be no signs of loading. So in the prior Metroid Prime games, a cool trick they used is that they would have these beam doors, and you would shoot them, and then once you get to the door, you would pass through, and there you would go. You would never actually see a loading screen unless you died or were loading into the game. But the game was loading. It simply used the doors to mask the loading so you wouldn't notice. and I imagine they'll still do something like this for Prime 4 Beyond, but with the vastly improved load times, we'll just shoot the door and go right in. I remember in prior Prime games, sometimes we would shoot the door and we would be waiting a moment or so before the door would actually open. This would be because the game was loading. For the Switch 2 version, I imagine there will be zero delay, or virtually zero delay, waiting for these doors to load up the next room and open. So if you put all of this together, I think we could be looking at a significantly enhanced version of Prime 4 Beyond on Switch 2 that wouldn't make the Switch 1 version feel inferior. These would just simply be improved elements that you would expect from a more powerful piece of hardware. I could go into other potential improvements we might see on a Switch 2 version, but that would be even more highly speculative because we really don't have that much of an understanding of what we're going to see in terms of controller changes or a potential gimmick. There's been some speculation that we might see analog triggers or scroll wheel buttons or improved haptic feedback, maybe VR support, perhaps an improved online infrastructure, and these different elements could certainly impact gameplay in different ways, perhaps for multiplayer, perhaps for a campaign with a VR headset as a side option for those who want to invest in that kind of tech, or maybe even something as simple as having a scroll wheel button where you can take your top R button, slide it left or right, and slide through your different beam weapons. These might be cool improvements, but I also imagine they won't be doing too many changes like this because they would want the Switch and Switch 2 version to be on par with each other, especially if there is going to be online play. You wouldn't want anything to be done that might lead to a competitive advantage. But what do you think? What do you make of the possibilities of a Switch 2 version of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.